Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Channel Anime, the anime review show. I'm John. This time I'll be taking a look at a Studio Ghibli film that wasn't made by Hayao Miyazaki. As requested by Cynthia Moorhead, I'm talking about Grave of the Fireflies. Based on the novel of the same name by Akiyuki Nosaka, written and directed by Isao Takahata, and set during the tail end of World War II, Grave of the Fireflies follows siblings Seda and Setsuko, who, after losing their mother in an air raid while their father was serving in the war, end up living with a distant aunt until she decides that they're too much of a burden, before ultimately moving into an abandoned bomb shelter with no power or heat and scrounging to survive. Now, there are really only two characters in the movie worth talking about, and that's of course the siblings Seda and Setsuko. Everyone else is basically a plot point. And there's really nothing terribly distinctive about either of them. They really just serve as the emotional center of the story than characters in their own right. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing when the story is this good, but more on that later. 14-year-old Seda serves as the audience perspective on the events of the story. He's really the one that we're meant to relate to and sympathize with throughout the movie. In contrast, 4-year-old Setsuko is the character who we're supposed to care for. Her youth and vulnerability in the midst of all of the horror and hardship of the war are really what give the story its emotional punch. Now, starting off with the art style of the film. Now, I have to admit that the art style is a bit dated, though it did remind me of Akira, just with more detail. And the animation, while not as fluid as Miyazaki's work, did really fit the mood and the story of the film. And anytime there was a shot of fireflies, it really felt like a Studio Ghibli film. Now on to the most important part of the film, the story. Grave of the Fireflies features what is easily the most gritty and realistic depiction of war that I have seen in any anime. And the tension and horror of the bombing scenes rivals anything I've seen either in animation or live action. I also found the matter-of-fact way in which the horrors of the war are discussed and endured by the characters in the film to be very moving. This even extends to the two major deaths in the film. They're handled very subtly, with absolutely no fanfare. It's just something that happens. Now, of course, there were some lighter moments in the film as well. I loved the scene in which Seda started swinging around the makeshift gymnastics bar in order to distract Setsuko from crying, and it was really touching to see that the two of them were still capable of having fun at the beach after everything that had happened in the film. The scene in which they collected the fireflies to light up the shelter was also very sweet, and the ending scene is easily one of the most beautiful things I've seen on film. Now, having said that, there were some particularly heartbreaking moments as well. I really hated seeing Seda stealing during the air raid, but I honestly couldn't blame him. And it really hurt to see Setsuko so delirious from malnutrition that she thought rocks were melons. And I will admit that while it doesn't happen often, I cried a few times during the film. Twice in scenes that I really can't talk about because of spoilers, and a third time when I rewatched the opening of the film to see it in context. Now, as close to perfect as the film is, I do have a couple of minor little criticisms. I felt that the scene where their aunt turns on them, which ultimately led to them being kicked out, was a little too sudden and unprovoked. And I really couldn't help but think that the whole idea of them moving into this abandoned bomb shelter, which was effectively just a cave, was a little unrealistic given how brutally realistic the rest of the film was. However, despite being a bit unrealistic, both of these moments were necessary for the film's ultimate emotional payoff, and totally worth it in the end. I really can't recommend Ghost of the Fireflies highly enough. Admittedly, I hadn't heard of it before Cynthia recommended it, and now I think that it really deserves to be better known and should be seen by everyone. It is an absolutely brilliant film that, while very different from what we usually expect from Studio Ghibli, is completely on par with their more famous work. Alright, that's it for Grave of the Fireflies. Thanks again to Cynthia Moorhead for recommending it. Until next time, when I'll be catching up with the current season of Legend of Korra, take a look down in the comments and you'll find links to both the subbed and dubbed versions of Grave of the Fireflies, links to find the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, links to my anime list and Crunchyroll profiles, and of course a link to Zombie Takeout, the Being Cult movie review podcast that I co-host and produce. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Based on the novel of the same name by Akiyuki. Based on the novel of the same name by Name's gonna get me.